Welcome to All Things Work. I'm your host, Anne Sparaco. This week, we're digging into ageism in the workplace and how the multi-generational workforce can really coexist to create a more inclusive environment. It's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And here to talk about that is Shari Collins, lead consultant and owner of Shari Consulting. Shari, welcome to All Things Work.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about Shari Consulting and kind of what your message is out to companies.
Yeah. So what I really focus on are the premises of DEI, driving organizational change, getting people to understand why it's important to have diversity and how we can have more inclusive environments at work.
I was reading up on this. You specialize in helping employers unlock ageism bias and create actionable change. Can you talk about that a little bit? Like, what does actionable change really look like? I know we could dive deep into that, but we'll give the basics here.
So with bias, a lot of that is internal. What are those internal stereotypes that you have? So a lot of it is just checking in with that and seeing how some of that shows up for you. A lot of bias, though, in ageism is systemic, so it's embedded into the systems. So some of those action steps take longer and take more people. But I truly believe in that concept of Kaizen, where if everybody takes a small action every day, you can have a huge impact over time. So just looking at those micro behaviors, what do we do? How do we interact with those people? What messages, coded language, we'll talk about that maybe a little bit later. How does that show up for people?
I love that. And so going to ageism, especially if you're, at different stages of your life, you may see it or define ageism differently. So how would you define ageism and who does it impact exactly?
Yeah, so by definition, it's really the easiest definition ever. It's discrimination based on age. And it's really a head, heart, and a hands definition. So it's not just what we think, but it's also what we feel in our hearts. And then it's also based on our actions. Ageism impacts everyone because we're all on that age continuum. It's not like we are either here or there, but we're all in it. So it impacts everyone. When people hear me saying that I work on ageism, they think or make the assumption that I'm talking just about the older people in the workforce.
Right.
But it is the older, but it also equally cuts both ways and impacts young professionals as well. And actually, it impacts all, especially if you're a woman with gendered ageism. That has a whole nother set of implications.
Yeah, so I think, even like you said, when you first think of ageism, a lot of people might think, just the older generations at work. That's who are impacted, but that's the actual bias that we have.
Exactly.
So it's funny how we kind of already addressed that. And in the inclusion and diversity space, we talk about this a lot at SHRM, about how ageism can be often overlooked. Why do you think that is?
Yeah. It is often overlooked, and it's actually proven through many studies that have been done globally. For example, one of my favorite ones that I like to look at is a Deloitte Global DEI study that they did in 2001. And when I first read the study, I thought, oh, yay, we're getting the hang of this, because 91 companies that participated in the study had really active DEI plans. And then when I dove into it deeper, only 8% of those plans had anything to do with ageism. 8%. So then it's that piece of how are we ever going to get better if we're not talking about it at work and it's not established in any of our plans. So that's one of the pieces. One of the pieces is it's also just so routine and it's so ingrained in our systems that it's happening right under our faces and we don't even see it.
Right. Yeah. You have to keep it at the forefront of your mind in order to be aware of it. So that's the beauty of this podcast episode. We're creating this awareness so that maybe our audience can walk away and kind of see it differently throughout their workday. We discussed this before recording. Indeed, you bring this up during your speaking engagements. They had an image of the different generations of the workplace at different stages, I guess, in your career. Can you talk about that a little bit and why it's so important to kind of recognize this maybe concern?
Yeah. So now when I do my workshops, this is how I start my workshops is with this infographic that was published. And it was created to show different career stages is what they titled the infographic. And they had a career stage for ages 21 to 25, for example, and so on. And then you get to age 55 to 65. And on the graphic, they titled that section decline. That was the word that they chose.
Right.
So the irony is I saw this all happening on LinkedIn. I had just gotten back to London from speaking at University of Cambridge on ageism. And I came back to London and saw this story. And I thought, what am I going to do as an ageism advocate? So I sent a message to the CEO of the company saying, I'm opening up some time on my calendar if you would like to have some ageism training in your company. Did not get a response, but I at least felt like I had to do something when I was there. So they posted later a rebuttal, an apology. And then ironically, the lady that was the chief marketing officer is 53. And it passed through her set of eyes as well. So that's what I always find interesting about that too. How many people were on those teams to create the idea of let's make an infographic. And then when it goes to creative and somebody physically makes the infographic, it goes through all the other approval channels, goes to social media and gets posted. And none of those people along the line thought, decline could be offensive to somebody who's 55 to 65 or somebody who's 53 or 54 and getting close to that.
And some people are honestly, even in those ages, in those stages of their life, they're getting started maybe in something different, and it's new to them. They see opportunity. They're not seeing, retirement's coming up soon. No,
Right.
it's not that. They're saying, and a lot of people don't want to actually retire. They want to keep going. They want because they love the work. They feel like they're contributing to society. So calling it a decline is almost assuming, you're pretty much done. You're not. You don't want to work. And everybody's like, what do you mean? Don't tell me that.
So just simple things like words, for example, just that one word can create huge bias and actions in an organization. I was just going to say, and I'm 60. And this is the first year I started doing international work. And I'm so energized by it. I had 4 international speaking gigs this year, and I'm looking to at least double that or more for next year. Like, I am not stopping. I'm doing some of my best work, and I love it.
I love that. So going back to the like chief marketing officer, 53 years old, I think it's also that people get so busy. I mean, you're an executive, you're busy all the time that they often don't stop to think, even if they are in that age group or they would probably find that offensive. They're so busy. They go, okay, that's good. There's no major errors. Go on. But it's, can you talk about how like it's important to slow down and really think from different perspectives as to, what this message is really telling people? Because then it hurts their brand at the end of the day that they had to come back and say, oops, we're so sorry. That was insensitive. Let's fix this.
They have 15,000 employees.
Right.
So think how many of their own employees fall in that age category. I was also thinking of that. Like really, they could be downgrading some of their own employees just by the use of that one word. So yes, the importance of slowing down, looking at simple things like just the words we use have a huge impact. Just as part of the definition, it's part of the words that we use. Also thinking about how our bias plays into that. Like some people didn't think decline was one of those words. Like, slow down and think about what that really says.
And it's good to speak up about it too. So I'm really glad that they kind of fixed that and recognized the issue there. And hopefully they did move forward with a different mindset, knowing that was maybe not the best approach. Awesome. So I want to turn a little bit to this. You've talked about this in your workshops, the 3 laws of protection in relation to ageism. Can you talk about that? What exactly is that?
So in the United States, we have 3 laws federally to protect people against ageism. And I will do a disclaimer, like I'm not an attorney. This is not legal advice. This is just basic information on the law. But we first have ADEA. That was in 1967. So almost around as long as I have been, to protect people from age 40 and up. So a lot of people don't even realize that there's laws in place to protect you when you turn 40. Many people have that assumption, it's when people are like 60 or 65 or a little bit older. So what I think is really ironic about that is according to the United States Chamber of Commerce, you are a young professional until you are 40. So there again, think of like the words that we use. So one day we're strolling around at work as technically a young professional. And the next day when we turn 40, we have laws in place to protect us from age discrimination. So that's ironic. So what's sad about that, though, is in 2009, the Supreme Court had a ruling on a case that makes age discrimination the hardest discrimination to prove, that you have to have a higher burden of proof for ageism than any other type of discrimination. So that's difficult when it has to be proven. And what does that say to me, sadly? It says to an employer, it's okay to have a little bit of age discrimination happening because they know that there has to be a higher burden of proof.
And that's tough to
Mm-hmm.
tackle.
Yeah.
And and then you got the whole legal process trying to bring
Right.
no, it's just that takes a toll.
Yes.
And so we talked about exactly who ageism impacts, but let's kind of turn things to the business side of things, where ageism can really take a toll. What are some of the things within an organization, such as productivity, hiring, retention? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, all of those things, right? One thing that's really important to me, it's been important for a long time, but more recently it's become more prevalent, is just the concept of psychological safety and how important that is. And the lowest rung of psychological safety is inclusion safety. So if you are not feeling included at your workplace because perhaps of your age or any other identities, you aren't going to be able to show up as yourself. The second level of psych safety is learner safety. So can you, as an older person, perhaps say, ooh, I don't know how that system works? Or as a younger person, you have to say, oh, I don't have that experience. I need somebody to help me. Do you really have the psychological safety to say, I don't know? Because a lot of people don't. And then the next level up is contributor safety. So if I'm not feeling safe based on my age, am I really going to contribute at work? And then the highest level is challenger safety. So if I don't feel any of those things, can I ever challenge the status quo? How will we ever get better? How can we be innovative? How can we be productive and tackle new things that are coming into the workplace?
You don't feel safe to kind of bring in your own thoughts.
Exactly.
Because you're afraid that at the end of the day, someone will say, oh, well, you don't understand. You're not part of this generation. Or like, this is the new way. And you're thinking in the old sense when, that's not always the case. Just talking it out sometimes will help people move forward in a different way.
Yeah. You're dismissed because of your age.
Yes. And no matter what age, really.
Exactly.
It happens to everybody.
You're either too old, you're too young, or you're too in between.
Right.
And especially with women, that's really challenging. And women going into leadership is another layer of intersectionality that's even harder.
It's a whole different challenge.
Yeah.
We have a separate podcast episode about that, but we'll stick to this right now.
A really interesting piece of research too shows that 77% of women, if they're older or younger, face the same kinds of discrimination and issues. So instead of it being an us versus them, we need to get that mentality of we're better together and we all bring great things. But us versus them doesn't get us anywhere. And if we really dig down or dial in, we're still facing the same issues, which I think is really interesting.
And do you have any examples maybe that you've personally seen in a company or that, you've experienced personally? Where ageism created an actual real challenge in the workplace outside of, inclusion and psychological safety.
Yeah, most commonly is technology. And I have had different roles where I've had to use technology, teach technology. And after those workshops, this is a piece of coded language. A lot of people say, wow, you're really good at technology. Like they mean it as a compliment. But really, it's one of those under the radar things of like, you're really too old to be, you're too old to be good with technology. So I think that's one that's maybe a barrier at times when new systems are brought in. And in many of the different places where I work or I used to do training, sometimes it was really hard to get some of the older people on board with some of the systems. Some of them were whizzes at it. But then same with the younger. Sometimes we make that assumption that because someone is younger, they automatically know these systems, when in fact, they may not either. So it's really those stereotypes. That technology is a big one. And then communication, I think, is another one, because we have all these stereotypes of how people want to be communicated with or through.
And we talked about coded language.
Yes.
And we brought this up a couple times, so I really want to address this.
Yeah.
When people hear that, they probably might not know exactly what we mean by that. So can you talk about what exactly coded language is?
Yeah, so coded language are words that we use that are seemingly neutral, but yet there's an underlying message. So often people will not come up to you and say, "Oh, you're too young to work here," but they might say something like, "Oh, you just graduated from college. What are your experiences with leadership again?" To say you really aren't old enough to have enough leadership experiences. So it might look like that. Another example might be someone coming up to a new person at work saying, "Welcome, we're so glad that you're here. Are you our new intern?"
Oh, gosh.
Meaning you look too young.
I've got
Yes, exactly. And then there's some on the other side as well. "You look really great for your age." That's another piece of, well, a microaggression technically, but would fall under the language of coded language. And then that piece of we're looking for somebody with 5 years of experience that we hear often. And then on the flip side, you have too much experience to work here.
So what are some of those words that I'm just curious that people really should be aware of, maybe to avoid?
There are words that are approved through the Journalist Society of ones you do and do not say. So there's a whole list of those. And yes, those like senile is another one. Boomers. Actually, we are really supposed to stop using those generational terms. All the ageism advocates that have way more experience than I do, like Ashton Applewhite, Janine Vandenberg, who's actually here from Denver, she lives here in Denver. But they advocate for not even using those terms in the workplace because they hold so many stereotypes, like boomers.
When we touched on how it impacts, like we said, younger professionals, like the young professionals, that's like a label of them. So can you talk about how it's impacting them as well? Like you said, are you an intern here? And I know, definitely, I know myself, I'm guilty of this, maybe calling out my younger coworker who I adore. She's awesome. But I definitely have said like, "Oh man, like, oh, that's so Gen Z."
Right.
And then I said, "Oh, that's actually, I got to stop saying that." I caught myself a few days ago and I said, I shouldn't say that.
Right.
So, what are your thoughts on that? How it's impacting everybody here, and especially those?
Yeah. I agree with what you're saying. Like we really should stop because it just perpetuates the stereotypes. One thing that comes to mind a lot is not having their opinions valued. Right? The younger professionals being overtalked in a meeting, not even being called on in a meeting when they have valuable information to share. So I think that's a really big piece. And those can be something simple like micro behaviors. If you're a leader, how do you open the floor and amplify the voice of those that are younger, that have wonderful ideas? But one of the ways you can do that in the workplace, that's a really simple way to implement it, is mentoring and reverse mentoring. And reverse mentoring is where the learning goes both ways.
I love.
Instead of the mentor just being the older, wiser person to share their knowledge, reverse mentoring. So let's just say you and I became in a mentoring relationship. I could share some institutional things that I know about HR with you, or some hidden rules that you may not know that are not written in a book that we could just share. But you could help me learn things that I don't know because you have different lived experiences as someone younger. So just that piece of setting up really wonderful relationships at work can be so, so valuable. And it seems so simple, but yet it's so valuable. And in my workshops, I also, just to get intergenerational friendships going, I have a section that I called, "Do You Have a Nancy?" Because when I started to work somewhere, I had a really great friend named Nancy who was 77 when I started working there. I was in my 50s at that time. And I remember walking into work. It was a luxury sales situation. I was there as a trainer. And there was a large group of women like looking me up and down when I came into the room to see who is this person. And she came up to me and she said, I had different glasses at the time. But she said, "I love your glasses." And I said, "Thank you. I love yours." And she took me by the elbow and she said, "You will be with me today." And she was 77 years old and took me under her wing. And I never forgot that. And I reminded her of that day after day. And she became, after she quit working and I quit working there, we still remained friends. And we talked every single day. But I honor her in my workshops by that slide that says, do you have a Nancy? And if you don't have a Nancy, I encourage you to find one. And same with all of our viewers. Everybody needs a Nancy.
We all need a Nancy.
We all need a Nancy. Yes.
That's gonna stick with me.
Yes.
I like that a lot.
Yes.
Let's dig deeper into maybe those concrete examples, especially for the different stages of life in your career. What are some concrete examples for, people who are emerging professionals and people maybe who are in their 30s to 40 areas and then older? Can you give us some ideas of that?
Yeah. So folks who are younger, they just may not be promoted, for example. That could be a very specific, concrete example. People think they don't have enough experience. They may not have enough leadership experience. So if there's any sort of opportunity for a promotion, they just aren't even considered. And that goes back to so many things, but a lot of it is the bias of those people making decisions, thinking, what is this person bringing? What value are they bringing to us? So that would be one example that's just really simple, but really obvious. For women, for example, that gendered piece of ageism, when we talk about you're too young, you're too old, or you're just in the middle, a lot of the women, when they experience age discrimination, they also are not given promotions or opportunities because people think they have too much responsibility raising children. So that, again, is that stereotype of if you are a woman, you will have a child. And that's a middle stage where they're not getting promoted. A very specific example, a really wonderful friend of mine is doing really great things at her workplace, was up for a promotion. She just had gotten married, and feedback through the company was an executive said, we're not going to give her a promotion since she just got married. She'll be having a baby soon. So there's that piece of gendered ageism for folks in the middle area. And then, of course, the older, they're either forced out, their voices are not heard, they're not giving opportunities for learning and development. Why would we send them to a conference? They're just going to retire soon. So any of those kind of things that you hear would be an example.
Or we don't want to put them on this project because they don't know the technology very well, or the assumption that they don't know the technology very well. So there's a lot to it. Those are just some examples, obviously. So when it comes to other coworkers who, may see it or hear about it, what are some, what can people do? Because like you said, this is hard to prove often that it's happening. So when is the time to speak up? What do you do in this situation if you're seeing this and you're like, okay, something's wrong here?
Yeah. In my workshops, to use your words, I have my slide that goes into that section is just called Speak Up. Like, we have to first start talking about it, offering training so people can understand what it is. And that's when a lot of those light bulb moments go on and people think, oh, this is happening right here. I didn't even realize these things were ageism. So I encourage people to speak up when they see coded language, which sometimes falls under the grounds of microaggressions. But with that, we have to understand not everyone has the privilege to be able to speak up either, because of their identities, because of many of those pieces, just like with psychological safety that we were talking about earlier. They don't have the privilege to speak up. They can't risk it. They have to have their job to pay bills. So with that, we have to also look for allies of other people who see it. And sometimes you just get that gut feeling like something doesn't feel right in this team or this relationship. So somebody who is an ally can also speak up. And we say that when we talk about microaggressions, like the first gut punch is when you hear the microaggression or the coded language. And the second gut punch is when nobody stands up to defend you. So we also don't know with some of these examples, is it the first time someone's hearing it, or is it the 77th time someone's hearing it? So imagine, how does that look? In the workplace, all things work, right? How does that look if it's the 77th time and no one has spoken up in your defense? Then that turns into something called internalized ageism, where you start to believe it. Am I really valued here? Does everyone want me to retire because nobody's valuing me? and you feel alone, of course.
And I kind of want to leave this with our audiences is what can employers and maybe HR professionals really do to implement just kind of strategies that help create that more inclusive environment across those generations? Because we know that that's not a small effort to make. But like you said, it's small steps, though, every day that can be done to achieve that higher goal.
Something real simple is just using ERGs as a tool for multi-generational relationships as well. We think of them, of course, as an affinity. That's what brings the people together that join an ERG. But within that ERG, there's so many ages. So why not capitalize on that? You're doing it anyway. So just embed that as a piece. In ERGs that I set up and work that I do, I embed mentoring as just a piece of ERGs. That's just how I set it up. Another really cool strategy is what's called a shadow board. So it's like a junior or a shadow is why it's called that, a shadow board of directors. So organizations find something that is relevant or really impactful to younger people at work that maybe the executives don't have the answer to because they just truly don't understand what the problem is. So organizations can set up a shadow board, and it's a true situation that's happening. It's not like a made-up example that we want you to feel valued, and we're going to give you this made-up thing to practice on, but it's a real situation at work. And then they partner with execs that are on the board of directors to do this work. So it breaks down the hierarchies, it forms the relationships, and then they're solving real problems. And there's some workplaces that have implemented this. One place attributed their sales jumping 136% just to using shadow boards. And the CEO specifically came out and said, we owe this to our YPs for helping us solve this problem. So that is really cool.
Thank you, Shari, so much for your time and your insights. This is definitely something I hope our audience, takes with them and hopefully creates that awareness step by step every day.
Awesome. Thanks for having me in today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's episode. We have new content each week through our newsletter, which includes our podcast, as well as research on these big topics. So head to SHRM.org/allthingswork to learn more and follow us on social media. You can like, comment, leave a review. We want you to be part of the conversation. That'll do it for this week. We'll catch you next time.